I got to tell thee, Posthumus, you sound a little paranoid. I really think you should have more faith in your bride Imogen. And why you would ever trust such a villainous troublemaker like Iachimo, I'll never understand. You know and I know that he can make up all kinds of stories to tell her about you being tempted by wine and women. Just don't let your own sad past affect your trust in your wife's fidelity. It's all right to have some doubts, but all I crave is that you use some sanity. First of all, the evil queen's a big bad woman who's going to carry on to the king about having Imogen marry her son Cloten. But as for me, I will go to my grave believing that Imogen would prefer the meanest garment that ever had clipped your body above him. Next, you've got to stop telling yourself that bad luck and trouble's been thy only friend. Enough with the negative self-talk already. I've heard you say that you've been down ever since thou was 10. How is this helping? And finally, I've been thinking about how you even claim that you've been down since you began to crawl. Sure, losing your father before you were even born and having your mother die in childbirth might make anybody believe they were born under a bad sign. But trust me when I tell you that you've got to stop telling yourself if it wasn't for bad luck, I wouldn't have no luck. You make your own luck, so promise me that I'll never hear you say again, if it wasn't for real bad luck, I wouldn't have no luck at all. If you've ever seen the 1973 film The Sting, you probably found it very difficult to follow all of the complicated twists and turns throughout the movie, because it's deliberately designed to keep you guessing the whole way through. That's why it's probably best to watch it more than once to make sure that you didn't miss anything. And certainly the same thing could be said about Cymbeline, so let's take a look at the plot. Cymbeline is the Roman emperor's vassal king of Britain. 20 years before, and unbeknownst to the king, Cymbeline's two infant sons, Guiderius and Arviragus, had been kidnapped by an exiled so-called traitor named Belarius. Now Cymbeline learns that his daughter Imogen has secretly married her lover Posthumus Leonatus, a member of Cymbeline's court. The lovers have exchanged jewelry as tokens of their faithfulness. Imogen wears a bracelet, and Posthumus receives a ring. Cymbeline dismisses the marriage and banishes Posthumus, since Imogen, Cymbeline's only remaining child, must produce a fully royal-blooded heir to succeed the British throne. In the meantime, Cymbeline's queen conspires to have Cloten, her cloddish and arrogant son from an earlier marriage, marry Imogen, thus securing her bloodline. The queen also plots to murder both Imogen and Cymbeline, getting what she thinks is a deadly poison from Cornelius, the court doctor. However, Cornelius is suspicious of her and switches the poison with a harmless sleeping potion. The queen passes along the poison to Pisanio, Posthumus and Imogen's loyal servant, saying it's a medicinal drug. Meanwhile, since she's unable to be with Posthumus, Imogen locks herself in her bedchamber to avoid Cloten's aggressive and unwanted advances. Posthumus goes to Italy where he meets Iachimo, who bets Posthumus that he, Iachimo, can seduce Imogen, who Posthumus has praised for being virtuous and chaste, and vows to bring Posthumus proof of Imogen's adultery. According to the wager, if Iachimo wins, he will get Posthumus's token ring. However, if Posthumus wins, not only must Iachimo pay him 10,000 ducats, he also agrees to a duel with Posthumus. Iachimo goes to Britain, where he first attempts to seduce the faithful Imogen, who rejects him outright. Iachimo then hides in a chest in Imogen's bedchamber, and when she falls asleep, he takes Posthumus's bracelet off her wrist. Iachimo studies the details of her bedroom, as well as a mole on Imogen's partially naked body, so that he can present them as evidence to Posthumus that he seduced his bride. When he returns to Italy, Iachimo convinces Posthumus that he has indeed seduced Imogen. In his wrath, Posthumus sends 2 letters to Britain. The first one is to Imogen, telling her to meet him at Milford Haven on the Welsh coast, and the second one to his servant Pisanio, ordering him to murder Imogen. However, Pisanio knows of Imogen's innocence and reveals Posthumus's plot to the princess. They travel to Milford Haven together, and he tells Imogen to disguise herself as a boy. He also gives her the queen's medicine, thinking it will relieve her troubled mind. Dressed as a boy, Imogen assumes the name of Fidele, which appropriately means faithful. Meanwhile, back in Cymbeline's court, Cymbeline refuses to pay the British tribute to the Roman ambassador Caius Lucius. Lucius warns Cymbeline that his actions will cause the Roman emperor to send Roman troops to invade Britain. At the same time, Cloten learns that Imogen has gone to Milford Haven to meet Posthumus. Putting on Posthumus's clothes, Cloten decides to go to Wales to kill Posthumus and then rape, abduct, and marry Imogen. Meanwhile, Imogen, still traveling through the Welsh mountains in disguise as Fidele, is starving and enters a cave. It's the home of Belarius and his sons, Polydore and Cadwal, whom he's raised to be great hunters. The 2 young men are actually Cymbeline's sons, the British princes Guiderius and Arviragus, who are unaware of their true origin. The men discover Fidele and are captivated by him. They become fast friends and treat him like a brother, even though she's really their sister. Meanwhile, Guiderius meets Cloten, who treats him very rudely. During an ensuing sword fight, Guiderius beheads Cloten. Alone back in the cave, Imogen's frail health worsens and she tries the medicine Pisanio gave her. The men return and find Fidele dead. They mourn Imogen, who is still dressed as Fidele, and after lying Cloten's body beside his, they depart. When Imogen awakes, she sees the headless body, and since it has Posthumus's clothing on, she believes it's him who's dead. As Caius Lucius's Roman soldiers arrive in Britain, the army moves through Wales. Lucius discovers the heartbroken Fidele, who pretends to be a loyal servant grieving his slaughtered master. Lucius is moved by the boy's dedication and invites Fidele to be his own page boy. Meanwhile, the evil queen is wasting away as a result of her son Cloten's disappearance. As this is happening, Posthumus returns with the Roman forces as they invade Britain, but after believing Imogen is dead, the guilt-ridden Posthumus changes sides, hoping to be killed. Belarius, Guiderius, Arviragus, and Posthumus all help rescue Cymbeline from the Roman onslaught. Even though the king does not yet recognize them, he takes notice as they fight bravely and capture the Roman commanders Lucius, Fidele, and Iachimo, thus winning the day. Filled with remorse for ordering Imogen's death, Posthumus says he's a Roman and allows himself to be captured so that he will be killed. Meanwhile, as Posthumus is sleeping in his jail cell, the ghosts of his dead family appear and complain to Jupiter about his grim fate. Jupiter assures them that he will deliver great happiness to both Posthumus and Britain. At court, Cornelius arrives and announces the queen's sudden death and repeats her deathbed confession of her villainous schemes against her husband, his daughter, and his throne. Cymbeline is troubled and relieved by this news and prepares to execute his prisoners, but Caius Lucius asks a pardon for Fidele, whom the king seems to recognize. Fidele sees Posthumus's ring on Iachimo's finger and demands to know how he got it. The guilt-ridden Iachimo confesses about the wager he made with Posthumus and explains how he tricked Posthumus into believing that he had seduced Imogen. Posthumus then comes forward to confirm Iachimo's story, revealing his identity and acknowledging his regret for ordering Imogen killed. Ecstatic at seeing her husband, Imogen throws herself at Posthumus, who still thinks she's a boy, and knocks her out. Pisanio then rushes to explain that Fidele is actually Inogen, but Inogen still thinks that Pisanio conspired with the queen to poison her. Cornelius reveals that the potion was harmless and proves Pisanio's innocence. Insisting that his betrayal years ago was a setup, Belarius confesses to taking the king's young boys and reveals that Guiderius and Arviragus are Cymbeline's own two long-lost sons. With her brothers restored to the line of inheritance, Inogen is now free to marry Posthumus. An elated Cymbeline pardons Belarius and all the Roman prisoners, including Caius Lucius and Iachimo, whom Posthumus forgives. Lucius summons his soothsayer to decipher a prophecy of recent events, ensuring a happy ending for all. Blaming his manipulative queen for his refusal to pay the tribute, Cymbeline agrees to pay the Roman emperor as a gesture of peace between Britain and Rome, and everyone is invited to a great feast. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable characters in Cymbeline. Let's take a look at some of the major characters in Cymbeline. We'll start with the king himself. Cymbeline is the king of Britain just before the birth of Christ. His wife is dead, but he's since remarried to a woman only referred to as the queen. Unfortunately, Cymbeline is really a doddering old fool who most of the time doesn't have the slightest idea what's going on. As a result, the queen plans to take advantage of him so that she can get her son Cloten on the throne, even if that means poisoning her husband to do so. Inogen is Cymbeline's daughter. She was raised alongside her childhood playfellow Leonatus Posthumus, so named because his father died before he was born and his mother died in childbirth. Even though the two of them fall in love and marry, her father banishes him because he wasn't born of royal blood and cannot be his rightful heir to the throne. Pisanio is the loyal and faithful servant to both Posthumus and Inogen, who acts as their go-between and finds himself put into difficult situations when his masters misconstrue each other's intentions. Cloten is the foolish and arrogant son of the queen who plans to marry Inogen so that he will be made the next king. However, Inogen sees right through him and doesn't want anything to do with him. And besides, she's already married to Posthumus. Belarius was a loyal and noble soldier to Cymbeline 20 years ago. However, Cymbeline was told that he was a traitor and banished him. A nurse named Euryphile stole Cymbeline's two sons, and Belarius married her. The two of them raised the boys as their own in the countryside of Wales. All of them took other names, and the two sons assumed they were their natural parents and never knew that they were actually descended from the king. When we return, we'll take a look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes in Cymbeline. Cymbeline is just chock full of plot devices. For starters, we have an overbearing father who wants to choose his daughter's husband because that person will become the next king of Britain. Well, at least this time he has a good reason for interfering. We've also seen this in King Lear with Cordelia, Master Page with his daughter Anne in The Merry Wives of Windsor, Capulet with his daughter Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, Shylock with his daughter Jessica in The Merchant of Venice, Baptista with Catherine in The Taming of the Shrew, and Brabantio with his daughter Desdemona in Othello. We also have the tried and true boy actor playing a girl's role who's disguised as a male. We've already seen this with Rosalind and Celia in As You Like It, with Viola in Twelfth Night, with Julia in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, and with Portia, Nerissa, and Jessica in The Merchant of Venice. We have banished characters like Posthumus, who joins a long list of other banished characters such as Romeo, Coriolanus, Henry Bolingbroke, Thomas Mowbray from Richard II, Falstaff in Henry IV Part 2, Valentine in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, Duke Senior and Rosalind in As You Like It, Alcibiades in Timon of Athens, Kent in King Lear, Gloucester's wife Nell and Suffolk in Henry VI Part 2, and Arcite in The Two Noble Kinsmen. Whew. We also have symbolic jewelry, in this case Posthumus's bracelet and Inogen's diamond ring. These circlets represent unbroken purity and a commitment to fidelity. we've got a gap in the action of 20 years that takes place before the play begins. This allows for the stolen princes, Guiderius and Arviragus, to come of age by the time of the play. Shakespeare did the same thing with the Antipholi and the Dromios in the Comedy of Errors, and with Miranda in The Tempest. And we wind up with a magnificent family reunion in Act 5, Scene 6, with Cymbeline, Inogen, Guiderius, and Arviragus all brought together. We also saw similar endings in The Winter's Tale, The Comedy of Errors, and Pericles' Prince of Tyre. Shakespeare also has Iachimo hiding in a trunk or a box, much like Falstaff does in the basket in The Merry Wives of Windsor. And there's also a prophecy, which, as we've learned, almost always come true in Shakespeare's plays. This one has to do with how everything is going to get sorted out by the end of the play. In Act 5, Scene 6, the soothsayer not only reads the prophecy, but explains it to all in attendance. Whenas a lion's whelp shall, to himself unknown, without seeking find, and be embraced by a piece of tender air, and when from a stately cedar shall be lopped branches, which, being dead many years, shall after revise, be jointed to the old stock, and freshly grow, then shall Posthumus end his miseries, Britain be fortunate, and flourish in peace and plenty. Then she explains, Thou, Leonatus, art the lion's whelp. The fit and apt construction of thy name, being Leonatus, doth import so much. The soothsayer says to Cymbeline, The peace of tender air, thy virtuous daughter, I divine is the most constant wife, who even now answering the letter of the oracle, unknown to you, unsought, were clipped about with this most tender air. The lofty cedar, royal Cymbeline, personates thee, and thy lopped branches point thy two sons forth, who by Belarius stolen, for many years thought dead, are now revived to the majestic cedar joined, whose issue promises Britain, peace, and plenty. This is a very similar oracle to the one in The Winter's Tale, which ends with the message in Act 3, Scene 2. The king shall live without an heir, if that which is lost be not found. And let's not forget the head trick, or in this case, maybe we should call it the headless trick, when Inogen wakes up to find Cloten's headless body dressed in Posthumus's clothes. There really are some magnificent and memorable scenes in this play. The first one takes place in Act 1, Scene 2, when we see the villainous Iachimo quickly talking Posthumus into wagering on his wife's honor. It's hard to really believe that anybody would do this, but we really wouldn't have a story if they didn't. In Act 1, Scene 6, Iachimo first tries to convince Inogen that her husband's been unfaithful to her, but she's too shrewd for this villain and sees right through him. However, Iachimo does know how to pivot and pretends that it was all just a test to see how virtuous she really is. Act 2, Scene 2 is the unforgettable bedchamber scene in which, like the Trojan horse, the basket provides wicked Iachimo access to Inogen as she sleeps unaware of his presence. If you've ever seen this play presented live, you'll know that this is the most riveting scene of the entire play. In Act 4, Scene 2, we see that Guiderius has chopped off Cloten's head and throws it into the creek. Belarius knows that this is the point of no return for him, because the king will no doubt send out a search party for his stepson, which could expose him as being responsible for taking the king's sons 20 years ago. In Act 5, Scene 5, we actually get to see Posthumus's dead parents and brothers all angrily rebuking Jupiter for putting Posthumus through so much suffering. It's an interesting inclusion that adds a supernatural element to the play. And naturally, Act 5, Scene 6 includes the climactic reunion scene in which all the surviving characters are brought together and the explanations for their situations are all resolved. All is forgiven, Cymbeline agrees to pay the tribute to Rome, no one is to be executed, Guiderius can succeed his father to the throne, and Inogen and Posthumus have a happy ending. Next up, we'll delve into some of the themes that run through Cymbeline. Now let's look at some of the heroes in Cymbeline. We'll start off with Posthumus, who first comes back to Britain with the Romans, then switches sides to fight back on Britain's side out of guilt for having ordered Pisanio to murder Imogen. But after he successfully fights off the Romans, along with Belarius, Guiderius, and Avaragus, he switches sides again because he wishes to be killed for how he treated his wife. Happily, though, he is rewarded at the end after Iachimo confesses his villainy. Imogen is by far the most noble character in the entire play. She never wavers from her devotion and loyalty to Posthumus. Even after she believes he's been killed, she still goes by the name Fidele, meaning the faithful one, while disguised as a page. Her dedication to the end mirrors Hermione, Desdemona, and Juliet. I want to read to you from Act 1, Scene 6, a little passage of Imogen explaining her feelings to herself. A father cruel, and a stepdame false, a foolish suitor to a wedded lady that hath her husband banished. O that husband, my supreme crown of grief, and those repeated vexations of it, had I been thief stolen as my two brothers, happy. But most miserable is the desire that's glorious. Blessed be those, how mean soe'er, that have their honest wills, which seasons comfort. In other words, Imogen would rather live an honest, simple existence than her miserable life in court with her husband banished. Pisanio is another truly decent character in the play. He maintains his loyalty as a servant to both Imogen and Posthumus, even when both of them are at odds with him because he refuses to do anything that would harm either one of them, despite their mutual misunderstandings of their circumstances. He's very reminiscent of Camillo in The Winter's Tale, who also needs to choose doing what's right over his loyalty to two different kings. Belarius is another good character, although he did steal the king's sons after being falsely accused and banished as a traitor. Yet he cared for and loved the two boys, raised them properly, and when push came to shove, fought bravely alongside both of them for Britain, even though it meant risking being captured, much like Antonio did to protect Sebastian in Twelfth Night. We also know that Guiderius and Avaragus both fought nobly on the side of Britain, and even though at the time they were unaware of their noble birth, demonstrated the true qualities of princes. Caius Lucius also deserves honorable mention because when he came across Fidele, he treated him kindly and pleaded for his pardon of Cymbeline instead of asking for his own life to be spared. There's really only three villains in the play: Iachimo, Cloten, and the Queen. Iachimo is a villainous troublemaker, yet he does come clean at the end and repent his guilt. Here he is in Act 1, Scene 4, telling Posthumus, "Strange fowl light upon neighboring ponds." He's indicating that he should be wary of unknown visitors. This is reminiscent of jealous Leontes in The Winter's Tale in Act 1, Scene 2, where he says, "And many a man there is, even at this present, now while I speak this, holds his wife by the arm, that little thinks she has been sluiced in his absence, and his pond fished by his next neighbor, by Sir Smile, his neighbor." Cloten is just an arrogant fool, egged on by his overbearing mother who has evil intentions towards Cymbeline, her husband, Imogen, his daughter, and Posthumus, who she views as being an obstacle to her son's ascension to the throne. Cloten gets what he deserves for provoking the true heir to the throne, and the queen dies an unpleasant death, although she does make a very thorough deathbed confession. The fact that everybody gets their just desserts in the end also gives Cymbeline a very fairy tale-like quality and makes me believe that it belongs in the comedy category. As I mentioned in the last episode, Hamlet is a play with themes of confidences and deceptions, while Cymbeline is a play full of deceitful confidences. Let me explain what I mean by that. The queen deceives Cymbeline, Imogen, Cornelius the doctor, Posthumus and Pisanio, all while speaking with each of them confidentially. The only one she doesn't deceive is her son Cloten. Pisanio exercises good judgment when he lies to Cloten and Posthumus during confidential discussions. This, again, is very similar to Camillo in The Winter's Tale, who must deceive Kings Leontes and Polixenes in order to keep them from making dreadful and irreversible decisions. Cornelius also exercises good judgment in his deception of the queen, believing that she would use real poison to do real harm. Iachimo deceives both Posthumus and Inogen in his encounters with each of them and is only honest at the very end of the play. And let's talk about rebirth, which is prevalent throughout the entire play. Inogen is reborn with a new identity, Fidele, especially after waking up from the sleeping potion, and again when she is reunited with Posthumus. We've also seen similar rebirths with Thaisa in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and Hermione in The Winter's Tale, also a short-lived one with Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. There's also Belarius, forced to live as old Morgan in banishment, who is given back his identity and status at the end of the play. Posthumus is reborn through Jupiter's intervention after much suffering, just like Pericles did before he was assisted by the goddess Diana. Cymbeline is reborn, ironically after the death of the queen and his stepson, when his daughter Inogen returns and he is reunited with his long-lost sons Guiderius and Arviragus. Let's just hope that he gets it right this time. When we return, we'll take a look at some of Shakespeare's most powerful lines in the play. While Hamlet is replete with long soliloquies, Cymbeline provides its appeal through the many twists and turns throughout the entire play. In addition, we are treated to the remarkable character Inogen, who is faithful, loyal, and completely dedicated to her husband Posthumus, who has been cruelly banished from Britain by her father, Cymbeline. Even after reading that her husband wants her killed for being unfaithful to him, she insists that Pisanio carry out his master's order, despite the fact that she is completely innocent of these charges. Here she is in Act 3, Scene 4, pleading in what Henny Youngman would probably call her "take my life, please" speech. "Why, I must die, and if you do not, by thy hand, thou art no servant of thy master's. Against self-slaughter there is a prohibition so divine that cravens my weak hand." In Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 2, we hear Hamlet say, "Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon 'gainst self-slaughter. Come, here's my heart, something's afore it, soft, soft, will no defense, obedient as the scabbard." What is here? The scriptures of the loyal Leonatus all turned to heresy. Away, away, corrupters of my faith, you shall no more be stomachers to my heart. Thus may poor fools believe false teachers, though those that are betrayed do feel the treason sharply, yet the traitor stands in worse case of woe. And thou, Posthumus, thou that didst set up my disobedience against the king my father, and make me put into contempt the suits of princely fellows, shalt hereafter find it is no act of common passage, but a strain of rashness, and I grieve myself to think, when thou shalt be disedged by her that now thou tirest on, how thy memory will then be panged by me. Prithee, dispatch, the lamb entreats the butcher. Where's thy knife? Thou art too slow to do thy master's bidding when I desire it too. This allows us to see how truly dedicated and committed Inogen is to Posthumus, and since she's already heartbroken, she would rather die at his request than live in his contempt. When we return, we'll take a look at some of the major turning points in Cymbeline and correlations to the other Shakespeare plays. Since there are so many twists and turns in this play, it follows that there are also going to be many turning points, but let's just look at a few. The first takes place in Act 1, Scene 4, when Iachimo challenges Posthumus to wager whether or not Iachimo can seduce Posthumus's wife, Inogen. Talk about stupid things on which to bet. This sets most of the personal relationship action in motion and causes a great deal of distress to our young lovers. It leads to Posthumus ordering his servant Pisanio to murder Inogen. Fortunately, he doesn't go through with it and comes up with a plan to save her life. Next, in Act 5, Scene 5, where we hear about, but do not see, how Posthumus joins with Belarius, Guiderius, and Arviragus to rally the cowering British troops and steal their courage through a narrow lane to overrun the Romans and defeat them. This one-sided outnumbered tour de force of 4 people leading the charge is similar to the Battle of Agincourt in Henry V, when against all odds, 5,000 British soldiers defeated 20,000 French by having them run through a narrow field of mud as their archers picked them off from a distance, losing only 30 British soldiers in the battle. And also in Act 5, Scene 5, we see the ghosts of Posthumus's father, mother, and 2 older brothers, appealing to Jupiter to stop persecuting their son and intervene for his good. Jupiter is annoyed with them, but promises to intervene and that all will be well. He also gives them a book for Posthumus that contains a prophecy which explains how all will be made right for him, the king, and Britain. Because this is one of Shakespeare's later plays, it's easy to see how many of the situations in Cymbeline correlate to some of the earlier plays. For example, Posthumus is an orphan raised by a king. In All's Well That Ends Well, Helena is an orphan raised by a countess. In both cases, the orphans wind up marrying the child of the person who raised them. Cymbeline contains a secret marriage between Inogen and Posthumus. We see this also with Romeo and Juliet, with Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn in Henry VIII, with Jessica and Lorenzo in The Merchant of Venice, and with Othello and Desdemona in Othello. Cloten says he's going to rape Inogen, but doesn't go through with it. This happens with Bolt and Marina in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, with Proteus and Sylvia in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, with Demetrius and Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and with Angelo and Isabella in Measure for Measure, not to mention Henry V's sweeping threat to the mayor of Harfleur if he refuses to open the city's gates. We also see unjustified jealousy on the part of a husband caused by an instigator, in this case Iachimo. That also happened in Othello when Iago decided to plant evil and fictitious seeds of doubt in Othello's mind about Desdemona. Cymbeline comes across as a doddering old fool who doesn't really belong on the throne. He can't seem to recognize things right under his nose most of the time, and his advisors don't seem to help him and do him much good either. At times, he looks a little bit like the inept and bedridden old Norway in Hamlet, the sickly Henry IV in Henry IV Part 2, the half-mad, half-senile King Lear, and the aging Julius Caesar, who always seems to listen to the wrong people's advice. Belarius agrees to marry Euryphile, who stole the 2 princes when they were young in gratitude for helping him out. This is similar to Sir Toby Belch marrying Maria in Twelfth Night after she successfully helped him play some pranks. The king is reunited with his estranged daughter at the end, just like King Lear and Cordelia. We're used to seeing great wrap-ups, resolutions, reveals, and reunions in the final scene of many of Shakespeare's plays, including As You Like It, Pericles, Prince of Tyre, The Winter's Tale, Measure for Measure, Twelfth Night, The Comedy of Errors, The Tempest, The Merry Wives of Windsor, and Much Ado About Nothing. And even though Imogen and Posthumus are already married, at least now they can start their lives together with the king's blessing. Guiderius slays Cloten and beheads him after being provoked, just as Alexander Iden does after being provoked by Jack Cade in Henry VI Part 2. But Cymbeline doesn't just correlate to other Shakespeare plays. There are also many fairy tale-like qualities in this play. For example, We have an evil stepmother/queen who uses poison that puts her stepdaughter to sleep. We have children lost in the woods and who eat food left in the lodging of others when they're not at home. These are all storylines that the Brothers Grimm incorporated into their fairy tales beginning in 1812, such as Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, and Goldilocks and the Three Bears. The characters are also rescued and comforted by kindly country folk. We've seen this before with Corin in As You Like It, Lord Cerimon in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and the shepherd in The Winter's Tale. Now, let's take a look at Imogen's reaction to Old Morgan, Polydore, and Cadwal when they welcome her, or him, with open arms. This is in Act 4, Scene 2. She says, "These are kind creatures. God, what lies I've heard. Our courtiers say all savage, but at court. Experience, oh, thou disprovest report. The imperious seas breed monsters. For the dish, pour tributary rivers as sweet fish." In As You Like It, in Act 2, Scene 1, Duke Senior says, "Now, my co-mates and brothers in exile, hath not old custom made this life more sweet than that of painted pomp? Are not these woods more free from peril than the envious court?" Also in As You Like It, Act 2, Scene 1, Orlando apologizes to Duke Senior's men after threatening to rob them for food, saying, "Speak you so gently? Pardon me, I pray you. I thought all things had been savage here." And finally, in Act 4, Scene 10 of Henry VI, Part 2, we see Alexander Iden express his love for the simple country life. He says to himself, "Lord, who would live turmoiled in the court and may enjoy such quiet walks as these? This small inheritance my father left me contenteth me, and worth a monarchy. I seek not to wax great by others' waning, or gather wealth. I care not with what envy. Sufficeth that I have, maintains my state, and sends the poor well pleased from my gate." Shakespeare repeatedly reinforces how the simple life of the country is an honest life compared to the corrupt society of the court. When we return, we'll look at some interesting facts from Cymbeline. In preparing to do this episode, I did some research and I came across some interesting facts. Shakespeare wrote Cymbeline around 1609, but the story originated from Geoffrey of Monmouth's 1136 account entitled Historia Regum Britanniae, which Shakespeare likely found in the 1587 edition of Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles. Some collections list Cymbeline as a comedy. Other books classify it as a tragedy. In addition, you could also say that it's a history play since it depicts actual world events. However, like The Tempest, Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and The Winter's Tale, it's probably best categorized as a tragicomedy since it contains elements of both. There's a lot of debate whether or not the heroine's name should be Imogen with two N's or Imogen with one M. However, the editors of both the Oxford and Norton Shakespeare believe that the name Imogen with the N in the first folio is a misprint of Inogen with two N's. In addition, an eyewitness account of the April 1611 performance refers to Inogen with two N's throughout the entire play. Cymbeline was one of the most popular plays during the 18th century and was one of John Keats's most favorite plays. The song Hark, Hark, the Lark from Act 2, Scene 3 was set to music by composer Franz Schubert in 1826. In the bedroom scene, Imogen is reading the tale of Tereus, in which Philomela is raped by her brother-in-law Tereus. He cuts out her tongue so that she cannot tell anyone what's happened or who did it. This is very similar to what happens to Lavinia in Titus Andronicus. By the way, even though Imogen tells Helen to turn down the leaf where she's left off, remember that this was taking place around the birth of Christ, and there weren't any paper books in use back then. Shakespeare chose his characters' names very carefully in this play. For example, Leonatus means born of a lion, and Posthumus means after death. Fidele means the faithful one, Polydore means many gifts, and Belarius's late wife Euryphile's name means good love. Cymbeline reigned from 33 BC until just after the birth of Christ and was the best-known British king at the time. Shakespeare references St. Luke chapter 2, verse 1, "And it came to pass that in those days there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that the whole world should be enrolled." Enrolled means taxed, meaning that Cymbeline really should have been paying his tribute to the Roman Empire. At that time, the capital of Britain was called Ludstown and later changed to London. When we return, we'll take a look at some of the remarkable actors in the 1982 BBC Shakespeare version of Cymbeline. All right, now let's look at some of the actors who played in the 1982 BBC Shakespeare version of Cymbeline. First, the incredible Helen Mirren, who plays Imogen, also played Rosalind in As You Like It in 1979, and Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream in 1980 with Robert Lindsay. Claire Bloom, who plays the Queen, also played Catherine of Aragon in Henry VIII in 1979, Gertrude in Hamlet in 1980, and the Lady Constance in The Life and Death of King John in 1984. Michael Gow, who plays Belarius, also played Alfred Pennyworth, that's Batman's butler, in the 1989 blockbuster film Batman, Batman Forever in 1995, and again in Batman and Robin in 1997. The magnificent actor Michael Hordern, who plays Jupiter, also played Capulet in Romeo and Juliet in 1978, Prospero in The Tempest, and the title role in King Lear, both in 1980, and LeFou in All's Well That Ends Well in 1981. And before that, he played Senex in the 1966 film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum with Zero Mostel and Michael Crawford. Terence McGinty, who played a British captain, also played Lucianus in Hamlet in 1980, the Second Gentleman in Othello, Servilius in Timon of Athens, and the First Gentleman in All's Well That Ends Well, all in 1981. Peter Aldwin, who plays the other British captain, also played the Second Company in Henry VI Parts 1, 2, 3, and Richard III, all in 1983. Hugh Thomas, who plays Cornelius, also played Lucius in Timon of Athens in 1981. Geoffrey Lumpson, who played Philario, also played Aegeus in A Midsummer Night's Dream in 1981. Patsy Smart, who plays Helen, also played a gentlewoman in Coriolanus in 1984. Graham Chowder, who plays Caius Lucius, also played Friar Francis in Much Ado About Nothing in 1984. Geoffrey Burridge, who plays Guiderius, also played Dumaine in Love's Labour's Lost in 1985. Robert Lindsay, who plays Iachimo, also played Fabian in Twelfth Night in 1980, Captain Dumaine in All's Well That Ends Well, and Lysander in A Midsummer Night's Dream, both in 1981, and Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing in 1984. Also in 1984, he starred in a revival of Me and My Girl opposite Emma Thompson, earning him a Tony Award. And in 2021, Lindsay starred as Moonface Martin in a revival of Anything Goes, in which he was reunited with Felicity Kendall, his 1980 Twelfth Night co-star, after 41 years. And finally, Paul Jessen, who plays Cloten, also played Clown in The Winter's Tale in 1981, multiple roles including the Duke of Clarence in Henry VI Parts 1, 2, and 3, and Richard III, all in 1983, the First Citizen in Coriolanus in 1984, and co-starred in Love's Labour's Lost in 1985. This means that he has appeared in 8 different BBC Shakespeare plays, by my count, more than any other actor in the entire series. And now get ready for today's trivia challenge, which is called It's a Girl. All right, now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called It's a Girl. Name the plays in which these mothers give birth to these daughters. Number 1, Hermione to Perdita. Number 2, Thaisa to Marina. And number 3, Anne Boleyn to Elizabeth I. When we get back, I'll have the answers along with some relevant lessons from Cymbeline. Okay, let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge, which was called It's a Girl. You were to name the plays in which these mothers give birth to these daughters. Number 1, Hermione to Perdita. That was The Winter's Tale. Number 2, Thaisa to Marina. That was Pericles, Prince of Tyre. And number 3, Anne Boleyn to Elizabeth I. That was Henry VIII. Now, let's wrap up with some relevant lessons that we could take away from Cymbeline. First, weak leaders coupled with bad advisors always lead to disaster. Someone once told me that the difference between humans and animals is that animals don't let the weakest lead. Always surround yourself with people you can trust. We saw this failing in Richard II and Henry VI. Make sure that you vet your advisors properly and that they continuously re-earn your trust. Next, practice developing good judgment. As Ronald Reagan once said, trust but verify. Cymbeline continuously demonstrated bad judgment by trusting his queen, thinking Cloten was a good match for his daughter, believing the lies about his loyal soldier Belarius, and completely ignoring Imogen's love and positive opinion of Posthumus. Both Imogen and Posthumus doubted Pisanio, even though he always demonstrated his love and devotion to both of them. Posthumus demonstrated poor judgment by believing the villainous Iachimo and doubting his wife's loyalty. Julius Caesar was also guilty of the same poor judgment of the men with whom he surrounded himself. Always remember to consider the source. And finally, simplify your life. We see how much happier the characters are in a pastoral setting. Also, sometimes less is more if you make your numbers count. Just look at how 4 people could motivate the Brits and overcome the Romans through their leadership. As the saying goes, never doubt that a small group of committed individuals can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. Please join me next time when a 9-month-old is named king, and his many squabbling handlers to his nation much trouble bring.